Welcome back, everybody. So, if you are watching this video, that means that, in my opinion anyway, you've made it through the hardest part of the class. You've done all the legwork to figure out your topic, to find sources where those things are, how to evaluate those. You've done your informative speech, which to me is the most difficult speech that we'll do. Some folks think that if something is shorter, then it must be easier. And if that's your standard, then yeah, maybe the informative was shorter. But the challenge of an informative speech, as you probably know by now, is to not persuade the audience. And now that's past. So we are trying to persuade, and we're going to move on to persuasion, which means that you can just tell us exactly how you feel and why you feel that way. No more sort of dancing around an issue or being super careful with wording in terms of at least accidental persuasion. So I really think it frees you up to focus more on the speech, the effectiveness, the impact that you're going to have on your audience instead of policing yourself in the way that you're going to present the topic. Now, before we jump into the material for today, I'm going to switch over here to the syllabus and let's go down on the schedule. And you will see that this week we are simply talking about the feedback from the informative speeches, which is on a separate video. Then we're going to cover some basics of persuasive speaking, and we are going to then move into Monroe's motivated sequence. What I will point out to you is that nothing is due this week or next week. So you've got a period of time here where it's going to be, on one hand, a great opportunity for you to do some legwork on this persuasive speech, to really start thinking about it now, putting it together, organizing it, outlining it. Go to the speech lab and work on that. I know many of you, a couple folks didn't go to the speech lab for the informative, and you missed out on those points. Now, for the persuasive, you need to go for at least one of the two persuasives. Actually, you'll see the date right here. So it's for the first persuasive that you'll need to go. That's by the 9th of November. So go ahead and do it early. And if you need to go back to the speech lab, go back, go more than once. Because remember, if you go more than what's required for the speech, which is only one, you get extra credit on the speech grade. So you're going to help yourself through improving your speech and getting those bonus points. So keep that in mind. Now, that's if you take advantage of this time and you work on it. Because on the other hand, what you might find is that this is a time where you could get off track. You could sort of put this on the back burner, which I understand you've got other things going on, but don't forget about your next speech. And remember that there's a reason that you have this gap in time, and that is to start really putting together a useful persuasive speech. Okay, so let's go on down to the persuasive speaking chapter, which is chapter 8. That's not it. There we go. Sorry, chapter 9. So let's blow this up and start talking a little bit about persuasion. It's important, as we've discussed already, to know the difference between speaking to inform and speaking to persuade. When you speak to inform, you simply want to educate people. And if you happen to change their views through that education, well, that's great. That's fine. So, for example, if you want to talk about the COVID situation, excuse me, and you talk about the risks of being in crowded places and the ability of the virus to stay on surfaces or hang in the air, well, that might logically lead people to think, boy, we probably shouldn't have in-person classes. But that was on them. You just gave them the information. They took themselves that next step. For persuasion, you're going to go ahead and take them that next step. And as you see on the outline, persuasion is when you try to purposefully change someone's attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, values, that sort of thing. When you look at that list, realize that for us, we are mainly going to target attitudes and some behaviors. we probably will never be able in a class like this one to really impact the audience's values or beliefs. Those things are at our core. And, I used to think that it was a pretty good example, but then I found out it's in a Shrek movie. Let me just pull this over. So this is not a bullseye, if you can see that. This is it's like a cross section of an onion, and people are like onions in these layers that we have, right? So the way that we can think of this for persuasion is out here we've got attitudes, a little deeper we've got beliefs, and then here in the core we have values. And behaviors can really be anywhere in that cross section. So, an attitude is simply an opinion about something, your preference for a particular like color of a car or a fragrance, that sort of thing. Those things can be fairly easily changed given an effective persuasive speech. So, one of the examples I've heard that I think really illustrates this is a speech on recycling. So, if you want people to recycle, there is a difference between trying to get them to see that they could make a little money and help the earth if they save their cans, as opposed to trying to make someone's core values about conservation of the planet change. Now, one can be a stepping stone to get to that deeper value shift, but that's all it will be. So for us, we want to stay on this attitude, external, sort of superficial level. Beliefs, those are not as deep as values, but they're still difficult to change. I mean, when you think beliefs, that word, you may think religious beliefs, which makes sense. And that's sort of where our belief level is. I don't know what your spiritual background is. It doesn't matter. You could have a particular religion or just not. But if you had someone come in from a religion that none of us are and gave us a very good presentation on why we should join their particular group, most people, if any, are not going to go and run and change up, right? You're not going to join another team because your beliefs are heartfelt. So they're a little deeper, and one or two speeches like we will do in this class aren't going to be able to connect in that way. So we could do a stepping stone on this attitude. Now, behaviors, again, are sort of omnipresent here. They're on every level. So, your attitude might be that you are about to go to the vending machine and get yourself a Coke. Great. Well, I can change your attitude by saying something like, listen, the Coke machine is not working really well. I've lost money in it, so you should probably get a Pepsi. And while I am a prime example of someone, when they say at a restaurant, is Pepsi okay? Hell no, Pepsi's not okay. I don't want Pepsi. But I'll get something out of the other machine anyway because I don't want to lose my money. So I would value my $2 more than I value, maybe having a Sierra Mist or something out of the Pepsi machine. Same thing with that behavior is if you're going to the machine and I say, hey, wait, here's some money, get me a drink too, please. That's changing your behavior, but you'd probably do it because it doesn't cost you anything, but maybe, 20 seconds, if that much. So again, behaviors can be super simple, or they could be a little more in depth, like saving your cans to make money, because we know it's more than saving them. You got to save them, store them, and then take them into the return. So there's some steps involved, but again, that's not a huge change. But if you wanted to really get someone to change their behavior in terms of a big lifestyle element, you're really going to have to work on that, and that's again not something we have time for here. Now, the next item you'll see there in what is persuasion is to avoid coercion. And if you're not familiar with the term coercion simply means taking away someone's free choice. So the classic example is a bank robbery that's an armed robbery, or at least they say they have a weapon. So if someone comes into a bank and pulls a gun, says, put all the money in the bag or I will kill you, you could make the argument that that employee, that bank teller, still has a choice. They could choose to give up their life in order to not give up the money. And while that's technically true, Coercion would tell us that that's not a choice, really, because our life shouldn't be put on the line. So for you, you don't want to be extreme in your depiction of the outcomes that people might experience. So, for example, even with smoking cigarettes, you don't want to say, if you don't stop smoking cigarettes, you will die. There's some problems there. First of all, you can't do the opposite. You can't say, if you do stop smoking cigarettes, you will live forever. We know that's not going to happen. Also, some people smoke cigarettes until the day they die in, their 90s or whatever. So, that one doesn't work out. Many people who smoke cigarettes die prematurely, but from other causes. You get in an accident, hit by a bus, whatever. So we can't go as far as to say you will lose your life if you don't do something. Now, you can put us in that direction. So for the smoking one, you could say that if you quit smoking today, you will reduce your chances of developing a terminal lung condition. That's fine because we can back that up with some evidence and facts that really can't be disputed. But that's the reason we still sell cigarettes in this country, because scientists can't say, sort of by the law of their own sort of reporting standards, that cigarettes cause cancer. They can say that the carcinogens in cigarettes cause cancer. Okay, great. So why can't we get rid of them now? Well, because those carcinogens are other places. So if we're going to ban cigarettes, we have to ban everything that has any of those carcinogens in it. And you see how that would snowball suddenly. So the big point here, try to change attitudes and superficial behaviors for now. Avoid going overboard with your attempts to make changes. Now, the best way to make these sorts of persuasive appeals for change are from what's called the rhetorical triangle. And you see it there on the screen. It's that red triangle with ethos, logos, and pathos. This is from Aristotle. So if you're familiar with this, then hang in there and get the review. But if you're not, the 3 points on this triangle all play an important role in persuasive messages. And the idea here is that while any one of these elements, ethos, logos, and pathos, could be persuasive, they work best when they're used together. So let's look at these. Ethos, as you see on the screen, refers to the credibility of the speaker and the sources that they use. So if you are, a doctor and you're talking about a medical topic, well then, you know what, you've got a lot of credibility there, more than likely. If you are, you're a college professor that teaches speech, a communication expert, and I'm talking about a medical topic, I don't have a ton of credibility there. That's just not my area of expertise. So if you don't have a ton of expertise, and most of you, if any of you, you don't have that yet. That's why you're here. You're getting your education. The way that you get a stronger sense of ethos is to cite quality sources. So at that point, it's not really you saying that this is good, this is bad, that kind of stuff. You're saying that this expert says this is good, this is bad, and now you become just the messenger and sharing that message from an authority that you've identified. So make sure that you are citing great sources. Now, in the informative speech, as there wasn't a huge issue with sources, but some could have been better. Some could have been explained a little bit clearer. And I think that's important that you understand for persuasion, there can't be any of those holes. You can't leave the audience wondering, what was that source? Is that credible? Why is it credible? I've never heard of that. What does it mean? So answer those questions for the audience. Also, you'll notice that you have to have 2 peer-reviewed journal articles this time around instead of just one, like in the informative speech. And that's exactly why you need that, is this notion of ethos. You want to be credible as a speaker. You can definitely lose credibility if you are, stumbling through a speech. You can lose credibility if you are clearly not prepared. You could even lose it after the speech. Think about it. If you were giving us a why you shouldn't smoke cigarettes speech, and then when we see you outside, you're smoking, that's obviously going to hurt your credibility, but it will not even, you won't lose it during the speech. You could lose it at any time after. So, be professional, feel professional, look that way, and really cite the experts here. Now, the next stop on that triangle is logos, which, as you can see, is where we get the word logical. And with a persuasive argument, having a clear, logical argument is vital. Some people want to make a very flashy, flamboyant presentation where they say many things that sound great, but the substance is not very strong. Logos tells us no, you need good substance that's clearly organized. So the first thing to remember is to follow the outline. We will talk about Monroe's motivated sequence in a few minutes, and that is what you will use for your persuasive speech. But just like you use the outline for your informative, you will again use it for the persuasive. So just make very sure that you are sticking to it. You're not adding or taking things out. You're not mixing the order up. Again, the outline is there to help you stay on track. And if you do that, your logic, at least in that organizational sense, will be fine. The part where you're going to have to do the work is making sure that the argument itself is logical. And we could spend a whole course on logic and talk about how if one thing is true, then does that make another true? You've heard probably about these things. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, right? So you're going to want to build the steps for us. Okay, all dog breeds typically have 4 legs. A Chihuahua is a dog breed, therefore Chihuahuas probably have 4 legs. I mean, that's a logical deduction that we make in our brains all the time, but we don't think of it sort of actively as happening. We just know it to be true based on our experiences. We call those schema, and we apply it to a new situation, and we make sense of it as humans. Don't make your audience do that mental lift, right? You do it for them. So as you explain details, they can see how for example, in our case, plan, step 1 leads to step 2, leads to step 3, and how all together they solve the problem that you told us that you are setting out to work on. Right? So again, use that outline and stay logical. Make sure that things make sense. Big deal here. I think your biggest guard on being logical is another person. Come to the speech lab and go through your logical argument. And, sometimes there'll be a little hole that you can easily fill, but unless someone else points it out, you would never notice it. I do this all the time. And it's because in our brain, we know what we mean. So we're connecting the dots automatically, but that doesn't mean that everyone else can or will. So don't rely on the audience to make the connections that you've already made. Go ahead and show it to them. Last but certainly not least, especially in 2020, on the rhetorical triangle, we have pathos. And this is a way of appealing to the emotional state of an audience. So there are tons of different appeals when it comes to emotion. We're going to talk about those in just a minute, as you see down there. But when I say that this is very important, especially now in 2020, it seems as though, at least in our country, that the appeal to emotion is really ruling the day for a lot of people. So, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on, many officials, politicians, the president, use emotional arguments. I'm just thinking about the vice presidential debate that was happening this past week. And the president commented on it and said, oh, she was a monster and Pence destroyed her. So clearly, first of all, we know that is, figurative language. She's not really a monster and Pence didn't literally destroy her. But using that language, that figurative language, is designed to spark or touch an emotion in a listener who can feel a certain way. I mean, when you think of someone destroying a monster, I don't know what comes to your head, but for me, it's like a knight killing a dragon, or the Ghostbusters getting a ghost, something along those lines. And it's this triumph of good over evil. And so, without even saying that, simply saying someone destroyed a monster, that's where our brains, whether we think about it sort of on the surface or not, that's where they go. And so we are then persuaded on this by pathos, because of the simple word choices that maybe are used. So with this one, it can be when you fire an audience up to get them motivated. It can be when you get them scared. Actually, let's look at these emotional appeals here. So you've got a fear appeal. Again, getting someone worried. We're going to look at some commercials in a few minutes. And I mean, this is what many of them use. So they'll make you feel like if you don't buy their product, you won't be safe. Classic example is the ADT commercials, the alarm system, where the family comes home, and it's not just like the dad comes in, because in our culture it's like, oh yeah, dad will take care of it. I know mom is badass too, but in the commercial it's mom and daughter, right? So it's these two helpless ladies. Well, I don't believe that, but that's what they're playing to. They come in, active robbery scene going on, and then the robber, thank God, runs away instead of attacks him. So what they're trying to do there is to appeal to people who identify with the mother and the daughter, to say, boy, we need to get one of these alarm systems. And by not including a masculine figure, they're appealing to all the fathers out there who care about their families and saying, you're not around all the time. Wouldn't it be nice to know that this was around all the time? Again, your chance of being robbed in our country, while it does happen, it's minute. I mean, you probably will never be robbed in your life. I mean, that's just the fact. But the commercial will make you scared of becoming one of those numbers. So you can take that for what it's worth. Some people will say, yeah, but it could happen. It's true, it could. But you probably wouldn't feel quite the way you do when you order one of these, unless you had seen a commercial. The next one is a positive appeal. So it's just the opposite, right? It's telling people that something good can happen if they do or do not do something. And this can be the same commercial, because they don't just leave us, with mom and daughter hunkered down calling for help. They leave us with the people there installing the alarm system. And then, I think the mom's tucking in the daughter, and she's already safe and sound asleep in her bed. So look, you'll rest so much better. Classic examples of this are, again, to use the example of smoking. The oh boy, I just went blank on the name of it. There's an ad campaign that's aimed at teenagers and young adults. It's like, we can get rid of smoking by this next generation, that kind of thing. And they use a blend of fear and positive. Now, most of their stuff is fear. That's the commercials where you've probably seen a guy goes in to buy a pack of cigarettes and puts the money down, and the clerk says, that's not enough. And he brings out pliers and pulls out one of his teeth and lays it down. So tooth loss is an effect of smoking. Or the woman who has the stoma, the hole here, and she's giving you advice on how not to get water in your stoma when you're taking a shower, because that's what happened to her because of cigarette smoking. So usually these things are fear-based, but then there's others that will tell you, if you stop today, you reduce your chance of these negative health effects by this much. Honest, I used to be a smoker, and the thing that got me to quit was the ad that was a positive appeal, where it said, it had a timeline basically. It was a picture of a cigarette, and here's the burning ends over here, and it had 1 year after you quit, 2 years after you quit, 3 years after you quit, and then it goes all the way out to like 15 years. And the idea is, if you don't smoke for 15 years and you don't develop a lung disease during that time, you are as safe as a non-smoker, because your lungs have regenerated. I don't honestly know if it's true. I didn't check to find out, but it motivated me. So, some people adapt, or I guess adjust more to fear-based arguments. Some like to hear positive arguments. You notice the highlighted line down here on the screen where it says, avoid using a single type of appeal. And you've got the example of guilt trips. If you just try to guilt someone into doing something and that's all you use, there's no reward. They call it the carrot and the stick, right? The carrot is the reward, the stick is the punishment. If you're all stick or all carrot, you're going to lose people who are motivated by the opposite. So, the ideal argument when it comes to pathos, anyway, will use things that are considered positive, things that are considered negative in tandem with each other. But those two, fear and positive, they're very popular, but they're not the only ones. You see some others, things like pride. This is any commercial that ends or somewhere includes proudly made in the USA. The one that comes to mind for me right now is it's called tack visor. It's this thing that you can get in your car, where your visor would flip down, but this one's see-through and it's got some kind of coating on it that blocks the sun while letting you see to drive. But their whole shtick is this is made with the same technology that the military uses. And throughout, they've got military sort of a vibe going on in the video, right? The guy's dressed not in fatigues, but, in the sand colored t-shirt with his t-shirt tucked into his pants that look like he's going on an adventure, and he's in this Jeep, the whole deal. But it's supposed to make you feel pride because, boy, if it's good enough for the soldiers, it must be good enough for me. And that well may be true. I don't know. I've not tried it. But that's the goal of that ad, is to plant that thought in your brain, again, whether you realize it and actively think about it or not. Next up, you've got guilt. That's pretty clear. Anything that tries to scare you on some level could have guilt built in. So, like, again, the ADT commercial. You've got, a parent and a child. I can only imagine that, I don't fall into this camp, but many parents could feel like, boy, if I don't get this and something happens, I'll never forgive myself. I'll be so guilty because I didn't do something. Now, they didn't have to say anything explicitly about guilt, but the implication was there, and the effect is probably going to happen for many people. So again, you don't want to overload people with guilt or put them what we call a guilt trip, but a little dropping of it, sort of a little taste of it won't definitely hurt you if you don't overuse it. Next up, and similar to guilt, is anxiety. You want to make people nervous about something. Sometimes it'll be things they didn't even know they should be nervous about and that they weren't nervous about until they see a commercial that tells them you may have a problem. I think of, I'm a bald dude, as you can clearly see. I think about like Rogaine commercials, or I think the brand is Keeps now, where you've got the guy with the hat on and he's talking about, I was going out in public and people were laughing at my bald head, and every time I'd get up, I'd see more hair on the pillow, and oh my God. I could see someone who they're not balding yet, see that commercial and think, oh no, what if this starts happening? I got to keep an eye out for it, got to be vigilant. And as soon as I notice it, I'm going to get some of this product. Now those people are just nervous when, okay, people lose their hair. I don't understand. Shave it. It's not so bad. Last but not least on this list is authority. And the prime example is when they say this is doctor recommended, or 4 out of 5 dentists recommend this thing, whatever it might be. So when you're giving some authority to someone who, in this case, legitimately deserves that authority, medical professionals, etc., depending on what the product is, that is what you can use to really connect with an audience. So they'll think, this isn't just Carl telling me that I should wear, Jordans. This is to be better at basketball. This is Michael Jordan, one of the best basketball players ever, telling me that I should wear these shoes to be better at basketball, or whatever it is. So there are times, though, when authority can go wrong, and we call that misplaced authority. So there is let me jump back here. There on the Blackboard site, you should now have a PowerPoint that will talk to you about these sorts of things. Hey, guitar parts. Let's see. Let's go to documents. Of course, we'll log back in. PowerPoint fallacies right here. So this is the PowerPoint that will go with this part of the lecture. You know what? Let's just look at it together while we're here. So, fallacies and fallacious arguments. A fallacy is a poor use of logic. It's often a purposefully misleading use of logic. It's when someone lies to you or doesn't tell you the whole truth, but boy, it can be hard to parse out. And it seems like, boy, that sounded right, but it's not. And so I tell you about these for two big reasons. One, more specific to this course, is I want you to be sure not to use these arguments. These aren't good. This is not something that is regularly innately persuasive, though it may trick some people. If people catch you using a fallacy and call you out on it, your credibility drops off the face of the earth, and then you have very little, if any, persuasive ability. But the second reason I tell you about it is because we see these every day, all day long. Conversations with friends, family, TV commercials, advertisements on the internet, you name it, they're out there. So let's talk about a few. Now, there are like 220 of these things. We're just going to talk about a couple because they are, as you can see here, so prevalent. From relationships to politics to celebrities, we can't escape it. So we are going to talk about these fallacies: causal fallacies, bandwagon, either or, straw, red herring, and appeal to misplaced authority. Now, before we jump in, there's one that I really should put on here, and I thought I had, but it is the ad hominem fallacy. And what that means is to the person, and it's when people name call, basically. Right? So you're going to go after someone's. You're gonna call them something or go after their own personal credibility without good evidence. So, for example, it's fine to say that is a terrible, idiotic idea, and then explain why. It's not okay to say, boy, that is a terrible, idiotic person. Go with the idea, because if you're going to say, well, why are they terrible and an idiot? Well, because they had this idea. Well, then why don't you just describe the idea? Trust me, I think a lot of people are terrible idiots for a variety of reasons. But in the case of persuasion, you don't want to explicitly state it that way because you want the audience to agree with you. And if they are of a different mind, they think this person is either neutral or great, somewhere in between, you're going to lose them by name calling. It just doesn't look good. It looks childish. But if you go after the idea and then explain why it's not a good idea, that's what you want to do. All right, so that's an ad hominem fallacy. Be aware of that. The next one there is a causal fallacy. This is when you say that something caused something else to happen, and there's some different ways this might play out. You could simply have weak evidence to say that thing A caused thing B to happen. And I've already actually gotten to a little example of this when we talked about scientists not being able to say that smoking causes cancer, because there are some middle steps that need to happen in between A and B. So if you don't use very thorough evidence and connect the dots to show this is how it's connected, you have used a causal fallacy. It could also be that there are multiple factors that cause something, and you are blaming only one, right? So if you wanted to think about auto accidents, the number of auto accidents in our country have gone up. Okay, I'm making this up. I don't know that they have, but they've gone up. And why are we blaming this? What are we blaming it on? Distracted driving because of cell phones. Okay, I have no doubt that that has caused plenty of accidents. But could it also be that, there are other things happening? Are there more drivers on the road now? Maybe. And if that's the case, maybe that's why there's more accidents, just because there's more of a chance. The classic example here is that you could say in the summertime, the rates of ice cream sales go up and the number of drowning deaths go up. Therefore, eating ice cream must cause drowning. Well, yeah, not really, right? I mean, you could use that poor, faulty logic, causal fallacy, but there's another connection, right? Summertime is hot, so people want to eat ice cream to cool down. Summertime is hot, so people want to get in the water to cool down. They go swimming. There is the real driver, not one causing the other. You've probably heard that correlation is not causation. And that just means that because two things either rise or drop together, it doesn't mean that one caused the other to shift. That's as simple as that is. And that's sort of a confusion of fact and opinion. Because you think it happens that way doesn't mean that it does. The example that I've got on the screen is the invasion of Iraq. And I know that's dated now, but when I was in your spot in college, we had just gone into Iraq, and people would ask frequently, why are we invading Iraq? And the answer that I would hear frequently that's wrong was 9/11. And those two things weren't connected at all. They didn't even try to pretend that they were connected in our government. But that was sort of this causal fallacy where people lumped, everything bad happening over there must be related to 9/11. And that's just not the case. Next up, we've got a bandwagon fallacy. If you're a sports fan, you're familiar with this one. So this is when you think something is right because it's popular. It's something that you want to be part of, so you go out and you join up, you get on the bandwagon. Sports fans have heard this plenty of times before. You see like the Super Bowl champions over on the side. This is when a particular team wins, the championship in whatever sport. And then, the next week you start seeing more people wearing jerseys or hats or whatever. So, oh, I didn't know you were I don't know, let's say the Lions win it all this year. We can hope, right? I didn't know you were a Lions fan. Oh, yeah, I've always been a Lions fan. But this is brand new, right? They're jumping on the bandwagon. Why do they do that? There's a few reasons, but groupthink is one. That is when you just sort of get sucked into a particular group and they're a fan of this particular team, so now you become a fan as well. It's tribalism, so in other words, like representing where you're from. I have noticed since I moved to Michigan 6 years ago that people are loyal to the Tigers and the Lions. I mean, it's kind of impressive. I'm from the South, and we don't really have a ton of specific teams unless you're from Nashville or something like that. But you all are tribal in that way, and it's a good thing in this case, right? It's this hometown pride, as where others might jump in because that's the popular thing to do. And often it's popular and they do it because they want to be liked. This happens again not just with sports teams but with political candidates. So I remember in 2008 when Barack Obama was running for president, many people liked him and his policies and voted for him for those reasons. Other people, especially people my age in 2008, voted for him because he was just the hot thing right then in that moment. He was on the different Tonight Show. He was on the late night stuff. He was on SNL. He's got Jay-Z on, the campaign trail for him. I mean, celebrities were jumping on it. So why wouldn't many young people jump on it? Now, again, that doesn't mean, hear me out on this, because it's popular, it's right. But it also doesn't mean that because it's popular, it's wrong, right? So these things are not mutually exclusive. You can be both right and popular or wrong and unpopular. But one doesn't necessarily make it right to be a fan or not simply based on popularity. Next up, we have let me move myself over, the either or fallacy. Either or fallacy is when an idea, an issue is presented and there are multiple options for how you might feel or the stance you will take, your position on that issue. But it's presented as though there are only two sides. You can either be over here or there. You're yes or you're no. You're black or you're white. in reality, we know there's a spectrum, or the idea of a continuum, which you see on the bottom of the screen. Um, the opposite of a continuum is an ultimatum. And that is when people say, you can either hang out with me or you can hang out with your friends. You need to make a choice. But we all know in reality, you can have both, right? Oh, well, I can hang out with you on Friday and hang out with my friends on Saturday. There are other options out there. But people want to be, they want to present it as though you can't be both. And an example of this is the pro-life, pro-choice argument. So if you look at that continuum at the bottom here, you grab a pen here. So here, let's say this is pro-life. Oops, definitely not good at this. And on this side, we are pro-choice. So most people in America aren't here, and they aren't here. Most people in America are somewhere in here. So, think about this. What does it really mean if you're pro-life? When is it okay to have an abortion? The answer is never. It's never okay to have an abortion. Okay, there are some people that are over here. That's just where they are. That's what they believe. Fine. There's people over here, pro-choice. What does it mean if you are thoroughly, completely pro-choice? When is it okay to have an abortion? Anytime you choose. That's the choice. But most of us, like 95% of us, are here where we realize that there's some middle ground. So even if you're on this side, let's put this line in the middle, you're on this side of the continuum, you might say, I really don't like abortion. I am against it. Except, I'll put my exception here in the case of rape or incest. Or except when the mother's life is in danger, or except when the child is going to be stillborn, and we know that for a fact. There are exceptions that move us in the opposite direction. Same thing over here, people. I'm pro-choice. Well, yeah, I support a woman's right to choose, except after a certain period, in the time here, third trimester or what have you, wherever that line is for you. I'm pro-choice except when people are using abortion to create a designer baby. This is a real thing, where people want, for example, they want a boy and they get pregnant and it's a girl. So no, just let's try again. All right, that's a real thing, and some people will say, well, that's an exception. I don't like that. Or I'm all about pro-choice except when this is like going to hurt the mother to perform this operation. There are examples on both sides of how we move toward the center. So in reality, most of us are probably right there. That's where we are. So don't let people tell you that there are only two options in anything. Most of the time, if not almost all the time, there are multiple positions that any issue can have. Now, next up, you've got a straw fallacy. And you see the scarecrow or straw man on the screen. This is when you misrepresent the opposing argument in a way that is not complete. You make it sound weak and frivolous so that it's easy to defeat. And that's not going to make you really stronger with your argument. It just makes you look as though you're not thinking thoroughly about the other side. And again, we go with this example of pro-life, pro-choice. People who are pro, let's say, life will look at the pro-choicers and say things like, they're a bunch of godless heathens. Well, that's just not true. I'm sure there are a couple, but many people who are pro-choice are religious, and they have beliefs and they're moral people. They just don't think that you should cross a line between church and state and legislate morality. Same thing on the other side. Pro-choice folks will sometimes look at the pro-lifers and say, they just are religious zealots that want to take women's rights back to the 1600s. I'm sure, again, there are a couple that fit that description. But the most of them are, they have a belief that's strong about when life begins and they want to protect the life. Then you could make the next argument about, well, why don't we help more once the child's here? That's a whole different argument. But the notion with the straw fallacy is that we don't discount or misrepresent an opposing argument just to make it seem weaker so that we can sort of, quote, win. It's not a good look. People will know it. They'll call it out. They'll say, well, yeah, but what about this? Now you've got to have some response, and a misrepresented argument isn't going to allow you to do that. Next up is a red herring fallacy. And a red herring is a fish, I know. This gets its name from sort of medieval times and prison breaks. So, back in the day, people would go to jail for owing debts, debtors' prisons. And they were very low security, and people would often break out and try to run away. And what would happen, of course, you've heard, release the hounds. Well, that's what would happen. You'd run away, they'd find that you were gone, they'd release the hounds, and the hunt was on for you. Well, when a prisoner who had escaped would get to a body of water, they would get in it, one, to dampen their own scent, but two, to find a fish, and literally, that's gross, but they'd rip it in half. And they'd throw one half one direction, the other half the other direction, and then go in the fourth direction. That's not, behind them. So then when the dogs come up to the water, your scent is, weaker, but now they smell this terrible, smelly, rotting fish smell, and the dogs want to go check it out, see what it is. Meanwhile, while they're distracted, you run, right? So you're making up some distance. And this in an argument is when people introduce irrelevant information to shift focus away. They'll come up with anything. We hear about whataboutisms now in our political environment, and boy, it's rife with whataboutisms. You'll see things about, well, Donald Trump didn't prepare for the pandemic, didn't respond to it very well. Well, Hillary Clinton deleted her emails. Like, how does that connect? Those things aren't connected. Both things can be true, but that doesn't mean that one is a logical response to the other. Things need to be sequential. One thing needs to respond to the other thing if you're making this sort of debate, this argument. So make sure that you're not doing that. You're not bringing up an issue that is not connected at all, and you just need something to try to score a cheap point. You don't want to do that one. Last but not least, you've got an appeal to misplaced authority. And you see Bieber over there. That's before he was a complete, scum. I don't keep up. But the idea there is that you give someone the title or the authority itself to be an expert when they aren't. They haven't earned that. They don't have the experience for that. For our course and in other situations in life, you can be an expert in one of three ways. One is to have 20 years as a professional in a particular area. Then you could be considered an expert, arguably. Two is to have a terminal degree, so a PhD, an MD, JD, those sorts of things, MFA. And then three is to have passed a certification test. So like, for example, I have a PhD, but my cousin makes more money than I do, and he's a master electrician, right? And he's been to prison. Come on now. But the idea there is that he's taken this test that said he's qualified to be an expert when it comes to his trade. And so those folks count as experts as well. But the example here with Bieber is proactive. This is the commercial. I think they went through most celebrities in the early to mid 2000s where they would come on and, I use it, it's great, I haven't had this best skin I've ever had in my life, oh my god, right? And what does Bieber know about this, really? I mean, how many books has he read on, probably just stop there, how many books has he read, but how many books has he read on chemistry and blending together chemicals in a safe way that will also clean your face? And he doesn't know. he knows that he uses it and that he likes it somewhat and that they paid him to show up and shoot a commercial. So we can't put people on this pedestal of expertise if they don't fit the description of what an expert should be. You could still say, not as a source, but as an illustration, people like Justin Bieber use this product and they rely on clear skin as part of their public image. That's fine. But you can't say, Justin Bieber recommends Proactive, so it must be great. I don't think you would do that, but others will. And so you need to be on the lookout. So, again, while there are a ton of different fallacies out there, there's over 200 that go back to the Greeks. We just went through a few of them here. So review these to make sure that you're not using them or they're not being used on you, because they are just really everywhere. All right, let's jump out of here. Again, the PowerPoint is on Blackboard. Let's get back to this. Okay, last thing for the persuasion chapter here is refutation. Now, when you are delivering a persuasive speech of any kind, there's going to be an alternative side, at least one. There's usually more than that. But if it's, the pro-life, pro-choice, there's a clear alternative. If it's pro-gun control or not, then there's a clear alternative. But what you want to remember with refutation is that if there is a common argument that is counter to the one that you're making, don't hide from it or try to keep it away from your audience. Highlight it, really bring a lot of attention to it, and then refute it, break it down. So, if you're going for, I don't know, let's do the COVID situation. We don't need to have in-person classes because, the virus is very contagious and it lives on surfaces, it hangs in the air, and it likes closed spaces. So we should not have in-person traditional classes. Well, the refutation might be, if you take the necessary precautions, you limit your chances of exposure, and we should do it because learning is best when it's in the classroom. And so, we really need to get people back to the classroom. Fair points. I mean, science can back up both of those. The refutation is, well, yeah, taking these precautions can make us safer, but it doesn't guarantee our safety. We can still get sick, and if we still get sick, we can still die. So I don't want to take that chance. And two, yeah, maybe people do learn better in the classroom, but let's face it, it's 2020 and things are moving into a virtual setting anyway. So the sooner we can start to adapt and do it at an understandable rate, not just shifting everything and expecting perfection, I think the better we can be in the long run as a country and a society who is able to, learn in various settings. So you can strike that down. That way, if it's in your audience's mind and they're thinking, yeah, well, what about the thing? Yeah, what about that thing? Let's talk about it. That way, before they can even make an argument back, you have shot it down, right? You've addressed it. You've moved on. Okay, those are, I should say, the basics of persuasion. Again, to review just quickly here, you will want to focus on changing attitudes and superficial behaviors so that it's possible to achieve your goal. Don't use coercion or take away free choice. Try to use a combination of ethos, logos, and pathos. Again, any of those can be useful, but Aristotle used the triangle not because he had 3 points and it was fitting, but because the idea is if you break any of these corners, any of the three edges here, the whole triangle collapses on itself. And what he was telling us is that if you leave out one of these, your argument will collapse on itself for at least some people, because you don't know in that audience if someone's going to be more affected by one of these three than another. But if you use them all, you're gonna connect on a wider scale. Don't forget to avoid fallacies and to use emotional appeals, but limit them so that you're not overloading us with especially one single type. Limit your use of emotional appeals and balance it between good, bad, positive, negative. And then last but not least, If there are clear arguments to be made against you, go ahead and bring them up and then shut them down and tell them why they're wrong. All right, so that's it for persuasion. The next video will be about Monroe's motivated sequence and explaining what it is, how it functions, and how we're going to use it. Next week, I will put up a video of an outline being made with Monroe's motivated sequence. And just like in the informative speech in that demo video, I will show you how to go from start to finish with blank to completed, in less than an hour using our class outline. So with that, stick around for the next video. Have a great week. If you have questions, as always, let me know, and I will see